Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and this week I have a video podcast with two very special guests. I have Patricia Ganger, who is my colleague at work. Hey Patricia. And
Hi.
this is Patricia's wife, Lauren.
Hi.
And Patricia, why don't you tell the audience what it is that you do, because it'll lead into the topic of this podcast.
Sure. I am a teacher of the visually impaired, which means that I teach students who are blind or visually impaired or legally blind in the public school system. So I teach a wide variety of things like Braille or technology or all different kinds of things to students who are blind who attend public school. And one of the things that we do a lot with at school is one of the areas of the expanded core curriculum for students who are blind and visually impaired is rec and leisure skills. So I actually ended up teaching some lessons about chess and other board games this semester. So,
oh, that's awesome. And in your non-school life, just like in mine, y'all are avid gamers. Is that correct?
Oh yes.
Oh yeah. But yeah.
So we've been talking about how after the pandemic we gotta get together and game some. But y'all play the full range of games, right? Like the tabletop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Tabletop games, video games, board games, just puzzles. I don't know.
Yeah,
I guess it's all the major kinds.
I'm presently in 3 different Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, and I'm looking to be in a 4th one if that person like ever has a thing. I live on Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. It's what I use instead of water.
That's amazing.
I thought you used Diet Coke.
I do use Diet Coke instead of water, but
80% of Patricia's DNA is
yeah, Diet Coke and D&D.
It's all D's, really. It's DC and D&D, and it's like, yeah. It's what I have instead of like the other letters.
DCDD.
Like,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
But Lauren plays a lot of video games.
I've been playing video games since I was little. My dad had computers sort of ahead of the curve because he was a software engineer. And so like I was on the internet when I was a little kid looking up Beanie Babies. And I played a lot of computer games, mostly DOS games. I remember acutely being frustrated that we had DOS and this game needs Windows. To give you an idea of how far back that goes. But then I think fell in love with it when I went to a daycare and they had a Super Nintendo there and they had Super Mario World. And that game is incredible and very good for like 1991 or whenever it came out. So I really fell in love with Nintendo, and then from there, video games as a whole became a passion of mine, and I have way too many of them in way too many boxes all over the house. But yeah,
we also both play a lot of board games.
We do.
We actually introduced our toddler to her very first board game. She is 2.5, and she has successfully played a board game.
Yeah, it's a Sesame Street matching game, and they have simplified rules because even that game's rules are too complicated if you're 2.5. But you know, she's working on turn taking and actually spinning the spinner, not turning it to what she wants.
Not turning it to the one she wants.
Yeah, but it's fun.
Aw, come on, let her check. That's so cute. So you are yourself legally blind. Yes. So what is your experience of accessing board games and how does that impact your gaming life?
So it depends very much on the board game. Some are more or less accessible. It's a very wide field of accessibility in the world of board games. One of the things is any board game that has a lot of words that you have to read, like cards that have specific things on them, like lots and lots of text. Those kinds of things do tend to be more challenging for me, but I usually come with my own magnifier that I can use to access those kinds of things pretty well. But that was not always true. So probably when I was younger and I did not have as many tools of accessibility for myself that I could bring my own magnifier to something, I saw that as a barrier to a lot of those games, and I know a lot of my students do too. So anything that was of the trading card variety was never really going to be something that worked for me, even though like Pokemon trading cards is like a thing, or like,
Oh yeah.
Lauren really likes this one card game.
It's been I'm a hipster because it's been out of print for years. It's called Magi Nation Duel, and I still have cases of the cards. And when I was in college one year, I introduced my roommates to it, and we all bought all these out of print trading cards and played this game.
But those kinds of games, like,
yeah,
are more involved for me. So I will
Mhm.
play games like that occasionally, but not as much as I do other things. Like, one of the games that we kind of reemerged in popularity at our house is Quarto, which is
Quarto is very good.
really cool and interesting game that involves the placement of pieces and understanding their different qualities. Like, are they short or tall? Are they light or dark colored wood? Do they have a hole in them or not? And the interesting dynamic there is that you select which piece your opponent has to place. So there is a little bit of a mind game thing.
Yeah, that's what makes it good. Otherwise, it would just be like a Connect 4 kind of thing. But you select your opponent's pieces
that they have to place.
So you have
somewhere.
to keep in your mind these 4 different dimensions of possible connections and select pieces to try to keep your opponent from.
And it's a 2-player game. It's a 2-player game. It's absolutely wonderful. And we have a set at home, but there's also a set at work.
It's a set that I had when I was little.
Yeah, the set we have at home.
Still have.
Yeah. And so, like, there are games like that that are not as based on words, that don't have as much like fine minutia that I have to read. That those things are a lot more accessible to me. You remember that game we got at that one con that one time, Mr. Jack Pocket?
Oh yeah, that one. It's like a tile placement game.
It's a tile placement game that's all based on Jack the Ripper versus Sherlock Holmes, and it's really good.
But that one also doesn't have a lot of
have a lot of words
clear
to read.
sight lines, and the cards that there are very like clear
and to the point.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, depending on the graphic design of the game and the text heaviness, that impacts the level of accessibility that it has.
Very much so. Like, I have seen, I have seen sets of what's that game? Settlers of Catan is an example. I have visually seen a set of Settlers of Catan that was nice and clear and easy to see, but it's not like the normal one.
Oh yeah. When I went to college, the first time I ever played Settlers of Catan, I played it at this co-ed fraternities like board game night for Rush Week, because I went to Georgia Tech, so there were even like nerd fraternities there. And they had a piece that one of the members had laser cut from acrylic. And so the tiles would interlock, and there were like spaces for you to put the roads, and they were these pieces of acrylic, and they fit into slots, and you could feel them without disrupting the board. And that would have been amazing, right? But that's something someone custom built, and not something that you can just buy in a box.
Yeah, because I feel like for me, Settlers of Catan is a very visually busy game. It's very difficult for me to see and understand the board state at any given point, because to me there's just too much visual like texture and things like that all happening at once. Mm-hmm. So I have never had success with playing it.
So what are some tweaks that publishers can make to games to make them more accessible to the visually impaired?
So anything that you can do to, obviously, anything where you can look at the board and it's like visually simple things tend to work really well for people with low vision. So bold lines, bright colors, solid colors, not like a whole lot of like visual texture. Those kinds of things tend to just be more visually difficult for low vision people. But then also, one of the great things that I learned, that I was working with my students on when we were doing a unit about chess, is I specially ordered a chessboard that was designed for people who are blind and visually impaired. And the only differences that were necessary for chess is to have it designed like a travel chess set, where they have the pegs that you can go like into the spaces. So that way, if you needed to feel the board, you weren't knocking over pieces. Mm-hmm. And then also adding a dot to a tactual differentiator to do white versus black. Mm-hmm. But other than that, chess is a completely accessible game. So it's a very easy game to make accessible for blind and visually impaired people. And actually, I think a lot of games, like with a few very simple.
Yeah, a lot of times it's, especially considering a lot of games, there's text, but it's not always necessary, or someone could read it out loud if you're in a mixed group. There's more of a, like, being able to feel the board state, I think, is a big one for you, because like I was saying with that one Settlers of Catan, you could have felt across the board, and that would have done so much to make it simpler, because you could feel where the roads are and things like that. Or you could see it because it was very clear.
Yeah, and as a kid, I do very vividly remember having a lot of game nights with family and friends, and with me just telling people to move my piece for me. That I would do whatever like the cognitive part is, but just being like, oh, okay, just move me. And that's not fun.
That's not
just because what would inevitably happen is I would try to move me, my wrist would bump into somebody else's piece, so we would be going, oh my gosh, where were you even? You know, those kinds of things were always really hard. So anything that means that like you can feel the state of the board without disrupting the state of the board, I think would be incredibly meaningful.
Oh, one other thought that I have from playing games with you is that games that require you to look across the table and see another player's state, like there's a lot of games you like take cards or tokens, and then you have to know how many your opponent has, but all that there is just like a pile of cards or tokens. And it's maybe a little better if there was some way to instead have that be like a very clear counter, so that there was like a number that someone could look at a time, and rather than just having to like eyeball a pile and say that's 8 cards versus 10 cards. Is that an important distinction?
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense, actually. So you mentioned, Patricia, that you were able to buy a specific chess set that was built to accommodate vision students and people in your program. But are there many games that are published with those sorts of accommodations? Can you buy a copy of even something like Monopoly for the visually impaired? I think most of the hobby board games, there's no way. They already, the print run's already so small. But if you wanted to, what games are out there?
So chess has actually been accommodated such a long time ago that there's a couple of different people who sell accessible chess sets. So that was actually pretty easy. One of the big things that happened relatively recently is that the National Federation of the Blind got together with Mattel and started publishing Braille editions of Uno that come already pre-brailled.
You can just buy them at
and
Target.
Making them available at Target. You can go to a Target and buy a Braille copy of Uno, which would have blown the mind of 12-year-old me, who was like, oh, if you want an accessible game, you have to like make it accessible yourself in some kind of like way. And a lot of the games I played when I was a kid, a teacher of the visually impaired, maybe at school, would have taken the game, looked at it, and used these Braille labels that we have that you can put into a Braille writer and add Braille to like a little sticker, and added stickers to things to make it accessible, when that's not necessarily always what we do anymore. Do you want to talk about 64-ounce games?
So there's a website that I found a long time ago, back when they had like 2 different board game sets, and I have not checked back in with them and what they're up to, except for I just pulled up the website before this, and they have a lot more stuff going on. It's called 64-ounce games, numeral 6, numeral 4, OZGAMES.com, I think, .com. And they are, they sell board game like adaptation kits. So it's not cheap, but you already have a board game. You already have Settlers of Catan, or I don't know what they actually have
or
there.
Monopoly, or you have a
you already
copy.
have the board game, and you can buy the kit from them. And if there's cards, they'll have brailled card sleeves, and they'll have like tactually differentiable pieces, and they'll have 3D printed some stuff to like make it more accessible, whatever they think you need for visual impairments. And they also now apparently sell Braille D20s.
Yes,
and things like that.
They do sell some Braille D20s. I have Braille D&D dice from a different place. But
we got them on Kickstarter when this one woman was like, I'm really sick of this not existing, so I'm going to run a Kickstarter and we get some of these made, which isn't easy to recommend to other people, but like a lot of her designs and I think her Kickstarter got enough attention that's why a lot of other places started to think about
the issue of accessible D&D.
Because she made actually a very impressive amount of money for one woman who had a 3D printer.
Yeah, she was one woman with a 3D printer. It took a long time for me to get my dice, but I use them a lot, so I appreciate it.
very worth it.
That's amazing.
Also, there's the I mean, it's a simple thing, but there's some place where you get those Braille playing cards that you have like 4 packs of.
Oh, well, Bicycle just sells Braille playing cards.
Okay, Bicycle also sells them.
So it depends on like what game you're interested in. And what's frustrating is inevitably if your passion is like kind of quirky, not your typical gonna buy it at Target board game, there's probably not a kit already available for you to accessibilize it. But
yeah, I mean, I think that they at least have had Munchkin, and so they like 64-ounce games has been trying to do some of these more kinds of things, but the problem is it takes a lot of work to make one of these, and people tend to cycle through games. So if you are in 2020 saying, oh, but I have an accessibility kit for like there's perennial favorites like Munchkin and Pandemic, but then there's also games that people get tired of. I mean, rightly so, that they
like I remember Ticket to Ride was like a really big thing, and then I feel like I haven't heard about Ticket to Ride in a while.
Yeah, I feel like people stopped talking about Ticket to Ride, and maybe I'm sure someone out there.
I'm sure somebody out there is gonna be like, no, I still play Ticket to Ride every day.
How dare you? Right. But yeah, they come and go, and these kits are kind of expensive. So there's kind of a like you have to buy in too. So you can't just be like, hey, let's play this game that someone brought over. You have to be choosy about which ones you want.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And I can also see how that'd be exceptionally difficult. Board gaming is very cult of the new. We've had more new game releases per year in the industry in the last few years than I can even imagine. Mm-hmm. And that means that the percentage of games that are hanging out long enough to receive any sort of accommodations is going to be really, really low. Yeah. And
then there's this explosion of like indie board games that show up on Kickstarter. And like I have a board game in my closet that I've never played that I got from Kickstarter. And maybe someday I'll play it with someone, but there's not going to be an accessible version of that because it's, there's barely is that.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So y'all are also avid convention goers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dragon Con.
We mostly go to Dragon Con. We're fortunate that we live very close to a very big, very diverse convention, so we don't have to go all over the place. There's one con right here that has everything you could want. It's nerdy and amazing.
Yeah. That being said, I do have occasional moments where I think really hard about trying to go to Gen Con sometime.
Everyone wants to go to Gen Con.
Yeah, I mean, that's true.
You and I should get special dispensation to skip pre-planning some year.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
sorry. Yeah.
I guess my question is, so, I think about cons and it's just a huge mass of people, which I can't even imagine now that we've like made it through 2020, right?
Right. Yeah.
But, booths everywhere, demos everywhere. How can you most enjoy a con as someone with a visual impairment?
So by sticking close with a really good buddy and or spouse. So what basically ends up happening, so there's kind of a two-piece thing. There's one, if I do travel around at a con using my cane, people think it's part of a cosplay. It happens a lot.
Yeah.
That people assume that I am cosplaying some kind of character who is blind. And I have been asked about where I got my cane numerous times because they wanted it for a Daredevil cosplay. Especially right when the Daredevil movie first came out or was about to come out before people knew it was kind of lame. People really, really, really wanted white canes and it was kind of complicated. Mm-hmm. But more than that, more of the time at Dragon Con, we tend to do sighted guide a lot there just because everyone is so close. There's not space for me to have my cane out in large groups of people all the time. And really where it becomes, Dragon Con is also exceptional about providing accommodations for people with disabilities.
Yes. Shout out to Dragon Con Disability Services. If you need them, go over there and they will
help you.
They'll help you out. They get your badge for you. They have all kinds of different like accommodations that they know about. Like you can't, they'll let you sit if you need to instead of standing in lines. They'll get you the ability to sit on the front row if you need to, or a sign language interpreter.
Or making sure you're a certain distance from an interpreter, making sure for a sign language interpreter. Mm-hmm. For me, the most common one that I get is a sticker that goes on my badge that I have to be within a certain distance of either the speaker at a panel or like the TV. So if it's in one of the
display projection screens.
Yeah, if it's in one of the really, really big rooms, it's like a certain distance from the display projector screens.
Right.
So that I have a chance of being able to like see what's going on. Those kinds of things. And they're really, really, really super helpful. So they are wonderful. And then beyond that, the biggest time I think we run into problems is in like dealer hall type situations. Where, because to me, I am so overwhelmed with stimulus in the form of like sounds and lights and colors and things that like I know that Lauren is able to walk down a row and like see something about what this or that booth has. And I'm just like, I see shiny stuff. I don't know even what is over there. I think I saw a corset. Is it a clothes place? I don't know.
It's also a challenge because I'm sitting there and I'm narrating the things that I'm seeing, but I have ADHD and it's also an overwhelming environment. So I'll just lock up in the crowd for long minutes, or I'll get turned around, or I'll see something that I want. I'll just go, ooh. And
I'll be like,
stop
like you were telling me about the Doctor Who thing.
Yeah, right. Or like a costume, like I'm saying, oh, you know, I'll break off in the middle of a sentence. I'll make that, oh, well, they are selling these absolutely amazing Doctor Who. Oh, look at that costume, right? And so it's challenging, but that's basically all you can do. You can also, I mean, there's a lot of leaning on the printed program and schedule, though in dealer halls, that's less helpful because they're just like Dragon's Tooth Creations. And you say, well, what is that? I have no idea. But
usually we go in to a con with a plan. We take a really hard look at the panels because we're big panel people. I know a couple of other people who are like, oh, you're missing out on all of what's great about the con because you spend all your time at panels. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? I like panels. So usually
marital confession, I'm like 80% as much of a panel person as you, and then like I know that you don't get as much from just being around as the rest of everyone, so I go to the more panels with you anyway.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we usually go in with a plan where it's like, okay, for this time slot we have like 4 different things. We're going to look at what hotel are we in at that moment might dictate like which one we actually make it to.
That's my pro tip, is if you're doing that, get more than one thing in each time slot you care about, because then it's really easy when you're there to say, oh, I really wanted to go to that, but I also want to go to this, and that's far away and going to be busy, or I missed it, or we need to eat right now, so let's skip it. And you'll know, you can look at the schedule and say, let's skip this and go to this, and we're close to this one. And it's just a lot. It helps out a lot. It does take a while. It's really helpful if you get like the app. DragonCon has apps now. You can just go build a calendar and figure out what's all there. Oh, hello, Thomas.
Oh,
cat on the podcast.
Always, cats are always welcome.
Oh, but do we want to talk about video gaming too before we get too far?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay. So video gaming accessibility is something that I spent a lot of time thinking about, because we've been, even before we were married, we're dating for like ever. And so it's something I started to think about really seriously.
Let's be truthful. One of your first thoughts in should I date this blind girl was,
oh, but I'm really into video games. What if she can't play video games? What are we going to do about that? Right? I have since learned that apparently there are a number of couples where one person plays video games, the other person just does not care, which I'm not sure I understand completely, but you know, that's fine too. No shame to them if they make it work. But so yeah, there's the thing about video game accessibility is that it is an incredibly multi-pronged thing, because everyone's different and there's no one size fits all solution. So there's accessibility like, can you make the game just easier because it's hard or not? How skilled are you? And then there's like accessibility for like physical disabilities and things like that. And there's all kinds of, I don't know, it's a huge topic with a lot of stuff that goes into it. But like, fortunately it's something that people are increasingly paying attention to, because like back in the early '80s, in the raw, untamed wilderness of what video games were like then, it was a lot more like, well, how big and clear and colorful are the characters, and do you have to read the words or not? And now there's all kinds of features and things available. And actually, like was reading articles that there's a game called The Last of Us 2 that came out recently. That this isn't necessarily a shout out for that game because I haven't actually played The Last of Us, but its accessibility mode is apparently exceptional because they thought of everything. There's a color blindness mode. There's a high contrast mode that just makes everything clear. There's one that shows you like this is the way you're supposed to be going right now. There's apparently one that makes it so you have just greater windows of time to do button inputs. There's one that's like sonifies the game, like there's something here you should find. It's making a sound so that you'll know to find it, right? And you know, that's sort of above and beyond like, you know, it's sort of commonplace now for it to be like, oh, here's color blindness settings. We'll just make sure things aren't red and green next to each other, right? But it's really, you know, there's a lot there with just different features and settings. There are audio only like video games that, and that's not even new. Like there's a lot of them now, but like that goes all the way back to like the Sega Saturn. There was a guy who was like, no, I'm going to make this audio only video game for Sega Saturn. And it probably even further back than that.
So where I go for information, if I'm looking for information about a specific game, about how accessible it is, because that's my big issue, my big barrier to a lot of video games is I want to try them first so that I can find out if I can play them, because it's not necessarily always true. That really got me into trouble with, you remember what that D&D-esque game was that I bought and was really excited?
Do you mean Sword Coast Legends?
I do mean Sword Coast Legends. So Sword Coast Legends was like that for me, where I was really, really excited about this game because of, you know, overlapping interests. And then the font in it was so small.
One mistake with this boneheaded thing where your HUD display and everything is scaled to your screen resolution. So no matter what you do, all of the elements are the same size on the screen. Yeah. So there's one of your favorite games, Dragon Age Origins.
Oh, I love that game.
It's a good game.
Well, can I tell a story about how I found that game? So I first learned about Dragon Age Origins because what I actually had found was the website AbleGamer, which is something I would like to put in a plug for, because ablegamer.org is the best place to go if you're trying to find out if a game is accessible before you like invest in it, which is always my problem. And when I was on ablegamer.org, when I heard about it at DragonCon, I learned that Dragon Age Origins won accessible game of the year for the year it was released, and that it had all of these things where you could do all of these mods and things like that when you got it on PC, and it meant that I could play Dragon Age Origins, and I had never really played that tier of like an RPG before. That was very new to me, and I love the Dragon Age series so much.
It's interesting because the thing that made the biggest difference in that game, it's a wonderful case study in making a game accessible because it had two things. AbleGamer noted this because they're primarily focused on like physical, like motor impairments, but they will note things that are problematic in like a sensory impairment way.
And they also are pretty good about colorblind.
Yeah,
like they rate colorblindness.
They do, but they say that like we can't comment on the number of different kinds of visual impairments and hearing impairments that there are, but we can in a visual medium. But so the two things that game had that really made it work is the number one, the majority of the line, well, three, I guess, because the majority of the lines are voice acted. So that's really helpful because you don't have to read walls of text. You can just hear what they're saying, right? Now, your replies in that game are not voice acted, as you know, but they actually did the opposite thing. They made a really boneheaded decision designing the game where it does not scale UI elements based on screen resolution at all. So if you have a high resolution screen, everything is tiny. So someone created this mod called the FTG UI mod. And that specific details aren't that important, but it's, you can install it. It patches the game in an unofficial way, and it lets you change the size of that to whatever you want, however big you want it.
You can have your current modern screen and play it at a different resolution, which means that the things are much bigger.
Yeah.
Like the text was just bigger.
But you can also say, well, you know what? I'm going to just turn it up past what the developers clearly thought it was going to be like. I can make it really big. I can substitute the font to put in an easier to read font, which we did for you for Dragon Age Inquisition too, is change the font. We did that. And the third one is not related to visual impairments at all. But
I am terrified of spiders in a really, really bad way. I cannot handle spiders, and it's not okay. And especially like the fantasy giant spiders. It's unfortunate because I really do like fantasy stuff, but that's also like such a trope, and I am so not able to access things that have giant spiders.
And there's a mod for this, lets you turn all the spiders like into bears, I think. So you are in a world where bears drop from the ceiling in caves.
I walk into a cave and bears fall down.
A swarm of bears fall down.
But I can deal with
that's so much less terrifying.
It's so much less terrifying.
Right? And that's the thing is digging into that, especially for subsequent Dragon Age games, there are communities of people that say, I can only play this if there's a way to take the spiders out. And it got to the point where in Dragon Age Inquisition, there was such a mod, but that game is much harder to modify. And it didn't actually work right. It was supposed to replace spiders with bears, but actually just corrupted the game's lookup so that the spiders had no model and were invisible.
Which is also fine.
Right.
Weirdly, because I also had the thing turned on where enemies had this like red circle around them. So I was just fighting invisibleness with a red circle on the floor.
Which is,
and
I'm okay
with that.
More terrifying because you're fighting invisible monsters in the dark and it's really hard to know what you're doing.
Invisible spiders are better than spiders you can see.
But exactly, it's a phobia accommodation.
It's just true. So the Dragon Age games will definitely, Dragon Age Origins was an absolutely amazing, like in the biography of my interactions with games, it was very, very important. I love all of the Dragon Age games. My other big exciting thing that has been very important to my life recently is that the Nintendo Switch has a built-in magnifier. So just like how I can use my iPhone and turn on the magnifier and it makes like everything on the screen that's like
bigger. It's a screen
magnifying software that's built into my phone. The Switch has that too. And so I can play anything on the Switch reasonably comfortably with certain kinds of things. And for me, I do a lot better with games that either you can pause and think for just a second or that don't rely on the twitchy reflexes are not always my thing. So my game that I'm super, super into right now is the Fire Emblem Three Houses. Has been my jam for all of winter break, because what I like to do when I'm on winter break is apparently play a video game where I lesson plan. That's apparently what I am doing. But no, I love my first Fire Emblem game was
it was Awakening on the 3DS.
Awakening on the 3DS, and I have been all about Fire Emblem games just so much, and Three Houses especially is just really being my jam. But my favorite thing about that is the turn-based nature of it means that nothing is like, oh my gosh, I have to do this right now, because that just makes me feel really anxious, and I don't like that. But yeah, I really, really love that game, and I love everything on the Switch because I can use the magnifier and be very effective.
That's not unique to the Switch. That actually Microsoft, shout out to Microsoft, they've been doing a lot of work in game accessibility. On the Xbox One, they introduced a lot. They started through software updates introducing a lot of accessibility features. So they have like a text-to-speech engine. You actually can use your Xbox completely with a screen reader if you want to. I don't know if all the software is like that. Games and stuff you can run work, but the main system you can run with a screen reader, and they have text-to-speech, and they have this magnifier feature that you can zoom in on parts of the screen. And since they implemented that, they kind of did it best because you can plug in an external keyboard and control your magnifier completely independently of all the game controls if you happen to want to be a person who is managing that much crazy things going on. But they since then, Nintendo and Sony have put that on the Switch and the PlayStation also, respectively, that there's a screen magnifier, and Sony's also picked up some of the closed captioning text-to-speech settings as well. It should probably also be mentioned, talking about Microsoft video game accessibility in the same breath. They have released a couple of years ago this thing called the Xbox Adaptive Controller. We don't have one, and we don't have much use for one because that's just not the challenges that we've got going on in our house. But it's a controller that's just off the shelf. It costs like $100, so it's not that expensive by itself. That is designed for you to plug in whatever you need. Like it's got 2 big buttons, but if you have any kind of like motor impairment, it's designed for you to just plug in whatever switches and dials and anything you need in an off-the-shelf thing that you can just buy. It's not someone that used to be something you would get because someone like took apart a controller and like soldered wires onto the traces, and which is cool that people do that, but they're selling that if that's the kind of accessibility you need is and they've made a big deal like you can use on your PC. They're trying to make it compatible with as many different platforms as possible because they're like, this isn't like gaming shouldn't be like limited in this way that because we're the ones that made this controller, you have to play an Xbox game, which I really respect.
And that's the thing, is we're kind of in a renaissance of these companies starting to think about these things and starting to really think about like people with disabilities and their access to games, and like across a very wide range of disabilities. And one of the things that was kind of a neat thing that I had the opportunity to do was the video game Perception, which the name of that company is Deep End.
The Deep End Games.
The Deep End Games made a video game called Perception that stars.
Their first game, actually.
It was their first. Yes, it was their first game, and it starred a character who was blind, as the protagonist of the game. And I ended up talking for a couple of hours with the developer of that game about characterizations of portraying a blind person in a video game, and then it kind of expanded from there to also being about what could he do on his end that would make it more likely that I would be successful playing this game as a low vision person. And I definitely could see that he took some things to heart from that conversation, because in talking with somebody that's what he does, is develop these games, it kind of became obvious that for me, I don't like feeling super harshly punished by a game unless it's like, oh, I really did do something stupid. Like from a tactical perspective, I'm okay with that. But if it's, I couldn't jump out of the way of a thing I couldn't see, I don't like feeling punished for that. And that's going to make me more inclined to quit playing a game. And so one of the things that he really took to heart from that is making the cost of like restarting, if you did get like hit by, I don't know, one of the weird creepy zombies, not zombies, like weird creepy dolls that are throwing hammers at you or whatever they're doing. If you get hit by one of those, like the cost of like starting over, you don't have to like go back all the way to the beginning. You don't have to have this like death, like you lost screen that takes up several minutes of your time. It was nice. To
be honest, that plays into like a deeper way that game design can be. That's not just a visual impairment thing, but that's it's very apt there. It's very valuable, but it's also skill levels and who are your player base and have they played a video game before? Are they like me and I've played video games for most of my life, or are they getting into this recently? And being able to there's things about the core way you've designed your game that can be less punishing for failure, or that can adapt to the player. Like Nintendo has all kinds of things that they do. Like if you've been trying to do something for a while that's too hard, they'll give you a boost, and the game is designed to adapt in that way. Or there's a game called Celeste that's a few years old now, but it's this indie game that came out that has an absolutely detailed assist mode that you say, this game is too hard because it's really hard. And you can go in there and you can say, I want the whole game to run just 3/4 as fast, or I want to turn on additional platforms, or I want to have additional abilities to jump and move in the world, because the game as presented is really hard. And it doesn't shame you. Like easy mode has been a thing in games for a long time, but a lot of games will shame you about that. They'll be like, oh,
can I play Daddy in Wolfenstein?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I hate that.
Beautiful Joe had like a kids mode, which is still too hard for me to have gotten past the second level, right? That goes way, that kind of thinking goes all the way back. But this one says, hey, this game is hard, and we want you to be able to clear it, and it's okay. You can tweak this to be your game that's challenging in the right way for you, and then it gives you all of these settings, and it doesn't lock out content. Like it's not like you can't get to the ending because you turned on the simpler mode, or you can't you know.
Or even just turning off permadeath in Fire Emblem games.
That's the thing that made Awakenings. Even I didn't want to play Fire Emblem before that, because I mean there wasn't a huge presence in the US, but one of the first ones I played, they're like, you can turn off the thing where you just permanently lose a unit and it penalizes you but not as hard. And the thing is that doesn't make me play the game in this smarter tactical way. That makes me ultimately not play the game because I feel compelled to reset.
Right. I'm actually the exact same way. It also makes me too cautious as a player because I feel like I can't just have fun. I want to be able to experiment or try something. And if that is taken away, it's not as enjoyable.
Sometimes I hate it when you have a game that the game state is so permanent that if you are playing briefly at less than your peak of performance, you'll regret it. You know, because then you'll make some dumb move because you want to play this game, right? You're like, I've got like an hour, I want to play my video game. Oh wait, sorry, you lost, and now the thing you've been trying to do for 2 months is messed up. And you know, there are genres I like that are like that, like some roguelikes are like that, but on the whole, I can't do that.
Yeah. All right, so I want to thank y'all so much for coming on and talking to us about all this. Before I let you go, I want one board game recommendation and one video game recommendation from each of you.
Okay.
A challenge.
I'm thinking.
Well, okay. I'll make a board game recommendation. I really enjoy playing. Now it's gone out of my head. Oh my gosh. This is embarrassing. It's that board game. We have it in the closet.
What do you do in it? Is it that one about the castle, like defend? Like
Castle Panic?
I'll say Castle Panic.
Okay,
yeah.
That'll
be my board game recommendation then. That was really good.
Okay.
Do you have a board game one?
So I'm actually going to go with a weird one because it's one that's not terribly accessible to me, but I love the idea of, and I want it to be more accessible to me, is this weird, quirky card game we got called Bring Your Own Book. And it is a strange little game where you get a card that's like a question, and everybody who's playing brings a book, and you have to flip through, and you're given a time limit, and you have to find a quote that you feel kind of comedically answers the question. And that's a direct quote from the book, and then you trade books, and it's a whole thing, and it's kind of structured like Cards Against Humanity, like there's one person who kind of judges, or Apples to Apples, one of those kind of games.
Right.
But I love the idea of that, even though every time I've ever actually played it, I just get really frustrated because other people can look through print books much faster than I can. But like, I want to play this game.
That's fair.
It is a good idea for a game. All right, what's your video game?
So video game recommendations. I can't do just one, but in a modern sense, I suppose that the ones I've been enjoying playing Hades recently, which is like a roguelike action game. It's also nails hard. It's very difficult. But in a more like leisurely way, I really enjoy if someone has not played The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, they should play The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. It is just this expansive game, and you get set up with the tools you need at the beginning, and then it really is just like, go do whatever you want. It's fine. Explore. And it's really structured in a way that makes it feel like an adventure, which is one of the things I really love in video games, is if it feels like you can just go into this place and have your own adventures and have fun.
All right. My recommendation for a video game is actually one that I think has a lot of these aspects of accessibility that kind of we were talking about for visually impaired people, the bold, very easy to see, clear graphics combined with giving you an opportunity to think about what you're about to do and plan moves and those kinds of things. And that is the Box Boy games. Oh. I absolutely adore them. And even though Lauren, who's much more a video gamer than I, tells me that they are very hard, or they can get pretty hard.
It's like a puzzle game with these strange mechanics, and it gets difficult, but it's cognitively difficult.
But I adore it. I adore all of them. I got like the multi-pack where you got like all of them or whatever at some point. And I just think they're so visually simple with being
You're a box. You're just a
mentally
box
hard
with feet.
that
And you can
it's
spit out
perfect.
other boxes. And that's the mechanic, is you can spit out these other boxes. But it's really good.
So I absolutely adore those games, and I would recommend them.
I feel a little embarrassed now that I didn't pop out with some amazingly curated indie selection. I play too many video games for that to be.
No shame. But again, thank y'all both so much for coming on. Those of you who are watching, hopefully you'll like and subscribe. If you have questions, you'll leave us a comment below. And happy gaming, everybody.
Happy gaming.
Happy gaming.